My name is Heather Miller, and we are super excited to join you today to help demystify that FAFSA and explain a little bit about how EverFi can help in this journey. I'm actually going to turn it over to my amazing co-host, Rachel Henry. So you're going to get to meet some of the EverFi crew as we go through here. So Rachel, if you want to go ahead and take it away, and then we'll introduce Jonathan here in a minute.
Absolutely. So glad to be with you all today. This is your session on demystifying the FAFSA, tools to help your students apply. So on the next slide, we have your crew here that is here to support with EverFi across the state of Illinois. So in addition to my colleague Heather, who just was chatting with us, and myself, we also have our colleague Jonathan Barnes, who's an implementation specialist out in the Chicago area. So we're all on the call today to walk you through this presentation. We also have a couple of other colleagues, both Michelle Fugate and Megan Moran, who you also might have heard from in the past. They also help support across the state as well. Unfortunately, weren't able to join us today, but just wanted to make sure that you knew their names because you might be hearing from them. So moving on to the next slide, we would love to hear from you. Thanks so much for folks who've already said hello in the chat. We'd love to hear about yourself and specifically what best describes how you support students. So are you a classroom educator, counselor, administrator, parent, or community member? Feel free to jot that in the chat. You can even share what school you're at. We always love to make those connections. So I see Cindy already put in that she's a classroom educator. Awesome. So glad to have you, Cindy. And the chat, if you are looking for it, should be at the bottom. There's like a toolbar at the bottom. You can open that up. And just know too, throughout this presentation, Heather and Jonathan are both going to be monitoring the chat as well as myself when I'm not speaking. So feel free to, jot any questions that you may have. We want to get that, answered during the presentation. And then we have Lakisa is a classroom educator at Marshall High School. Awesome. Good to have you. Kevin, also classroom educator. Perfect. Well, thank y'all again so much for including that information. We love to always see, who we have here in the session today. So yeah, thanks so much, Linda Jo, also a classroom teacher. So where we're headed, we're going to talk about the why behind the FAFSA and having this webinar around demystifying FAFSA. And then we're going to talk about those tips specifically for increasing FAFSA completion rates. And then we're going to pause for questions. And one of the things that I want to make sure to share in terms of my background is I did spend a couple of years in the classroom. I taught down in Dallas Independent School District. I'm originally from Texas, although now I live in Dubuque, Iowa. And of course, get to support educators like yourself in the state of Illinois. But prior to joining EverFi, I actually spent a few years in financial education. Financial aid office at a private college. So I was at Cornell College in their financial aid office. And so this is, of course, a near and dear topic to my heart in terms of making sure folks have the education they need when it comes to filling out the FAFSA and getting, all of that aid that they qualify for. So happy to speak, to my knowledge and expertise in that area, especially, again, when we get to that Q&A section. And then we're going to turn it over to my colleague, Jonathan, who's going to talk about resources to help students complete the FAFSA. We have a couple for you. And then we're going to round out our time in breakout rooms with getting started with EverFi. We do have a couple of resources that will help in the student's journey with completing the FAFSA. So going to the next couple of slides, I think we want to start with one more on what's going on. So of course, with COVID impacting everything in our lives, we definitely want to talk about how this has changed kind of the landscape of higher education. So we know that even before the pandemic, quite frankly, student loan debt was bubbling over, and that brought a lot of concern for Gen Z and really influencing how they're making decisions when going off to college. So they're asking questions like, what is the true cost of college? What can colleges offer me? What is the quality of life for college students? And if I'm really spending this much money and investing this much money, is the campus ready for me? So that being said, applying to college and understanding how to finance college is already tough, and now it's been exacerbated by COVID-19. So one student's experience really highlights kind of those negative and compounding effects of COVID-19. And this was an article in the Chronicle of Higher Education. Isaiah was a student that had planned to go off to a 4-year university, and he wanted to be an ESPN sports announcer. And then COVID hit. His mom lost her job, and he had to really evaluate, if it is worth it in terms of going ahead with his university education. So his decision was that he decided to go to a community college and change his plans because of COVID. And we know Isaiah is not unique in his experience. One of the things that you'll see kind of in the top corner is around a concept called summer melt. And this is essentially where a student, would apply for an institution, get accepted, and maybe even submit a down payment, and then decide not to attend. And so that is something that is definitely has been heightened because of COVID, because of the economic crisis, and it's something that we know is disproportionately affecting our most vulnerable student population. So the quote that you see right there in the center, that comes from the college advising course that says, we're very concerned that this could be the least diverse class to matriculate in decades. So this is why we want to share these tools with you, is to combat these systemic issues. So going to the next slide, what we have here is why this is important. So it's really a conversation and a question of equity. So the purpose of the FAFSA is to provide that need-based, income-based financial aid. And when we have that, in order to, ensure that students have access to that financial aid. And we know that there are students that are being disproportionately affected by this. So you have an infographic over to the right that highlights different populations, and Black and Latino students are more likely to change or cancel their education plan. So you can see how that's affecting. The light blue is canceled plans due to COVID, and then the darker blue is changed plans. So what we're seeing is that the impact of COVID and various different outcomes, right? We're seeing it in the digital divide, and health outcomes, and economic outcomes, and also educational outcomes. And now we're seeing it in college matriculation outcomes. There's a quote there at the bottom of the screen that says, any uncertainty can really rattle you, especially if you're the first in your family to go to college. And so again, we know that this education around FAFSA, being able to demystify the FAFSA, is just more important than ever before. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. So going to the next slide here. So what is the FAFSA? So this is, it stands for free application for federal student aid. So at a really high level, what the FAFSA provides is financial aid for students based on needs and income. So when students go in to complete the FAFSA and share their family's income information, what happens is the federal government will process that FAFSA and generate what's called an EFC, and that stands for expected family contribution. And basically what that number is it says this is how much dollars your family can contribute to your higher education. So for example, if a student is given an EFC number of 0, where their parents couldn't actually support their higher learning, in those cases, those students would receive the highest amount of aid, especially need-based aid. So really that FAFSA is the main route to getting financial support. So it's super, super critical that students are submitting that as soon as possible. And we know that application opens, later this week on October 1st. So we would, again, really encourage your students to apply as soon as possible. A few other things to kind of keep in mind here is that FAFSA is a first come, first served basis, and there is a fixed allotment of grants and aid, which that plus being able to just get their financial aid award letters as soon as possible is why we want students to prioritize this. It's as important as just even applying to the institution. It is free, so that's always really important. Students should never, ever, ever be charged to complete the FAFSA. If they're being asked for money, it's definitely a hoax. Again, like we said, prioritizing doing this sooner the better. Really want to make sure that students aren't treating this, like something that can be, done at the last minute, because once they have submitted the FAFSA and included the institutions that they want to send that FAFSA to, right, once it gets processed, then those institutions of higher education can generate that financial aid report and get that to them so they have more clarity around what their cost for college will be or whatever institution they're going to. So if you do have influence or pull with a student, the goal is to have them get this done as soon as possible. We just can't reiterate that enough. When we think about what FAFSA actually gives students, you can think about it in these three types of categories. So we have grants. That's the good stuff. That's the stuff that that students wouldn't have to pay back. There are different types of loans. Some of these loans cover the interest rates, especially subsidized loans, if students are eligible for that. And then we also have work study, which is also needs-based aid. Again, a student wouldn't know, right, what they qualify for unless they fill the FAFSA out. And also, according to NerdWallet, students leave over $2.9 billion on the table each year when it comes to FAFSA, money that the FAFSA would show them. So that figures show that 47% of all 2013 high school graduates didn't complete this required first step that could have earned them Pell Grant money. So again, that's 47 of students who could have earned or could have been awarded Pell Grant money. Again, that's money that they don't have to pay back. And again, just reiterating the need here. So going into the next slide, we do have a quick poll for you all. We're curious to know what you think is your biggest barrier in supporting students with the FAFSA. And you can answer either by putting in the chat A, B, C, or D. So A is not feeling like an expert. B is sensitivity around student/family personal information. C is lack of time. And D is not built into the daily role. So just looking at our chat here that are coming in, really appreciate the participation. It seems like a lot of folks are putting A, but I also see some C and D and B too. Really helpful feedback. The good news about especially A, not feeling like an expert, is that you don't have to be an expert. The FAFSA process can be, pretty complicated. It's been simplified over the years, but it's still a little daunting. And just know that that is exactly what financial aid counselors are there for. They're not the only ones, but there's someone who's a former financial aid counselor. I can't recommend those folks enough. They're the ones to answer those technical questions. So moving to the next slide, let's talk a little bit more about the barriers with the FAFSA. Like I said, it is getting a little bit easier. Golly, it used to be that you would submit it paper-based, and now it's pretty much all online, which is great. One of the big hurdles is that tax information piece and collecting those private documents. We're going to show this tool here in a second when we get down to the tips, but there is a way for a student to link out to the IRS to pull in their tax information. And then all of that tax information gets pulled in so that they themselves don't have to insert it. And that's going to, again, help with accuracy. So that's one thing that is a bonus. And we'll have a link here in a second to instructions on how to do that. There's also something called verification that you just want to have students be aware of. That, let's say, for example, they fill out their FAFSA, they put on the schools they want to send their FAFSA to, and then the school comes back and says, you've been selected for verification and we're going to need these documents. Just know that it is definitely, it's a random process. There's just one of those things that can happen with just checking the accuracy of the FAFSA. So all they want to do is just submit whatever forms that the college is requesting them to do. And if they have any questions, to work with them. I worked with many, many families when I was at my last college, and we're here, they, in that role, I was there to walk them through everything so they felt supported. There's also sometimes some technical questions and difficult questions for non-traditional family members. We're going to link out to the federal government website that has some good Q&A on those types of questions. So just know that that information is out there for you, and especially around undocumented students too. So going into the next section, we do have additional tips to help students apply. So if you go to the next slide there, Heather, talking about FAFSA support. So jumping down here, we do have lots of different bullet points here. So first and foremost, you could fill out your own FAFSA as practice to help students. So that's something that's available to you so you can get familiar with the different screens. Another thing is you can identify your expert in your district or state. And so I did link out to the Illinois Student Assistance Commission. We have a link there to their website in this deck that we'll be sharing. And they have lots of great resources when it comes to completing the FAFSA. So you can definitely reach out to them. In addition, I know I already highlighted this, but using the IRS DRT, which is the data retrieval tool. Again, that's when you can have a student link out to the FAFSA to pull in either the student's tax information and or the parents. So depending on students, if they end up becoming, or if they end up being considered a dependent on the FAFSA or an independent, that will change whether they have to submit just student tax information or also parent. Again, all those questions are built into the FAFSA, but either way, the IRS data retrieval tool is there to make that a very clean and easy process. Again, we talked about verification being a possibility. The students just want to work with their financial aid counselor to get all those documents if they need to submit those. And like I said, I guess my number one tip is just, again, have them connect to their institution of higher education and their financial aid counselor. This isn't just, by the way, have to happen this year with seniors, although I would really encourage seniors to do that. But also, let's say you have juniors this year that are doing like virtual school visits or in-person visits. I would definitely encourage them to meet with their financial aid counselor, even if they haven't been able to submit a FAFSA yet. It's never too early to do that. And then we're also going to have in the later slides some Toolbox, some additional hyperlinks. So we'll get to that in a second. It's what we call our Toolbox. And last but not least, learn what supports your school offers. So a lot of schools offer FAFSA nights. Sometimes there's virtual appointments where students can share their screens and get support, and then also community events. So we're going to pause right there before we share the toolbox to see if y'all have any questions that y'all are that are coming up. Feel free to put them in the chat. Happy to answer those. I know sometimes like a big question that I've gotten before is worried about students being worried about doing the FAFSA wrong or making an error when they submit it. And definitely, again, going to those experts, college financial aid counselors, these different, there's actually on the federal government website, there's a chat feature that you could chat with a support person. There's lots of ways. Yeah, thank y'all so much. If any other questions come up, feel free to type those in the chat. So let's look at the toolbox as well, because we want to make sure that we show you these links. So I really like this tagline, know how to find the expert, not be the expert. Again, there is really no expectation that everyone should know how the FAFSA works and all of its details, because it can be very complicated. But we did want to give you a few links. So Understanding Financial Student Aid is the website that from the federal government, and it does a really good job of like breaking out, here's the difference between scholarships, grants, loans, and work study. So that's a really good one if you want to even have any high school student go through that and learn more. Really recommend it. We included the link to the IRS data retrieval tool. So if you're working with a student right now on that, that'll take you step by step on how to use that tool within the FAFSA. We also have the Nitro College Guide. That's another website you can use to get, again, best practices and tips on filling out the FAFSA. And then lastly, for those technical questions, especially regarding things like citizenship status on the FAFSA and other kind of technical questions, you can click on that link and see what the federal government's guidance is on that. I'm seeing the chat here. Linda Joe asked a really good question. With taxes, do you use the students or the parents? So it really depends on if a student is listed as or is considered a dependent or an independent on the FAFSA. And the definitions of those two have to do with how they're categorized by the FAFSA. So there's some initial questions that are asked. So if a student is a dependent, I believe they do have to submit parent tax information. Again, and we're going to highlight this in some of our additional tools, but we have tools that help guide students to that conversation with their families, because we know that especially with very sensitive information that's requested from parents and guardians, that we want to empower students with that knowledge of why maybe, for example, a parent's social security number would be needed for completing the FAFSA. But when in doubt, check with the college financial aid counselor.
And then Rachel, we have another question from Jim that I think is a great one. So do you have to file the FAFSA every year that the student is in college, or just the first year?
This is great question. So every year that the student goes to college, they will file the FAFSA. So the FAFSA that's being released here on October 1st would be for the 22-23 FAFSA. It's hard to imagine, but that is just next year. So students will be required every year they're in college to fill that out, because that FAFSA only covers that academic year. And typically, I will say too, usually the higher ed institution is really good about communicating with students about when to get that filled out as an extra reminder. Really good, Jim. I really like that one. Awesome. Well, feel free to keep those questions coming as you're thinking about them. Really good. We're going to transition now into additional tools, and I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Jonathan, to go into that.
Hello, everyone. Just wanted to do a real quick overview about who we are as EverFi. Has anyone, feel free to drop this in the chat, have any of you ever worked with EverFi or used EverFi in your classes before? Excellent. Cindy has. Wow, we got a fan crew here. Loving it. Great. So I can blitz through this a little bit quicker than I was anticipating, but just as a real rough overview, we are your partners in whole child learning. We have amazing digital platforms with a variety of different topics. They all have built-in assessments and grading. We have offline lessons to supplement those, and local support, which is something that both Rachel, Heather, and I, we all do that. We are your local partners here in Illinois to help you out with everything you need. So Heather, you want to go to the next slide? And this is just a really brief overview of everything we do here at EverFi. You'll notice in the far left-hand corner or far left-hand column, that is our financial education suite. It's where we really started. And today we're going to be focusing on two of our programs, the EverFi Financial Literacy Program and then Pathways Financing Higher Education, which is a really great program that really goes in depth on, a lot of questions students have about how they're going to afford college, what it looks like to pay for college, and what that looks like moving forward into the future. So EverFi, we'll just start on this one really quick. It is a really great foundational education element that gives students a lot of tools and knowledge on what it really means to be financially literate. Everything from what it means to have your first paycheck to how to handle that paycheck. Do you want to deposit it in a bank? How to open a savings or a checking account? Consumer skills, managing credit and debt, but also we do start into financing higher education in EverFi. So my overall advice on all of our programs is if it sounds interesting, please poke around and check it out and play with it. See if it's right for you. But let's talk a little bit about pathways. Thank you, Heather, for advancing me. Pathways financing higher education. So just really quickly at a glance, it is really interactive. It's scenario based. So these are based off of real life, real world scenarios that a lot of your students are going to find themselves in. Everything from questions on how they're going to afford to go to college to advice and guidance on how to talk to their parents about things like filling out the FAFSA and why it's important and why all that parental information, the tax information is needed. So the thing that I really like the best is the first module, which is the return on investment to higher education, because a thing that I've been learning is that, higher education isn't always for everyone, and that's perfectly okay. But learning how the investment in financial education or the investment in college education can pay off over the long run is a really important thing for every student to just at least consider in their lifetime. So we can go on to the next slide. So yeah, we have a digital experience. We have lesson goals. So like I said, the first one is return on investment, why college education is important, what it can do for their future. The second one is kind of the meat and potatoes of why we are here today, understanding financial aid, what it means to get a scholarship, what it means to get a grant. How do you fill out the FAFSA? Where do you make up the difference for what the FAFSA can provide versus what it cannot provide? The third module is student loan basics, talking about private loans versus subsidized loans, budgeting for your loans. And then the last one is all about how repaying those loans works, which was something back in my day that was not totally clear to me. And now I'm learning about it, and I'm in my 40s. All right. So again, addressing the FAFSA barriers. We talked about what the barriers are to filling out FAFSA, at least in helping students fill out FAFSA, but this really goes step by step into how to fill it out. It's an opportunity for tier 1 intervention. It's scalable to really every student that you have. Every student will have access to this. It's one of the great things about our programs is that we have unlimited student licenses, so all of your students can use it. It breaks down the documents, the information students will need to gather to effectively fill out the FAFSA. A thing I already mentioned, an interactive scenario on how to fill it out with a parent or a guardian, and then a strategic tool to support completion rate goals, which I think tells into our next slide. Yes, this is the one I was excited to see. So by going through this program, you will see that we have demonstrated provable knowledge gain in these areas. So higher education and financial aid, understanding that's a 25% knowledge gain. Learning about loans, 40% knowledge gain, and how to pay off loans responsibly, 42% knowledge gain. So really, there are facts and data that back up how effective this program is in at least increasing the student knowledge in what they're getting themselves into with financing their higher education. All right. So when we send out this slide deck after this, the parent and guardian discussion guide, that is a clickable link, and it takes you to the document you see on the right, which is a really handy tool for students to reference as they're having conversations with their parents and guardians about filling out the FAFSA, why it's important, if the parents have done any planning for the students' financial or educational future, if they've set aside savings or if they've planned on financing or helping to finance that education. So it's a really great tool that we wanted to make sure we included that.
And just hopping in here too, back on that slide, I, again, as a former financial aid counselor, I think this is a great tool to maybe have families and students go through together prior to like a college visit. Because that gives them a little bit more questions, even if they don't know the answer, maybe they can ask, and it gives them a little bit more, that prior knowledge. So that would just be my tip for utilizing this document.
Excellent. One of the best things about EverFi is that we are offering $1,000 529 college savings scholarships in America this year. So there are instructions on how your students can apply for that in our digital homerooms, but we have lots of scholarship opportunities available thanks to our sponsors. So basically the criteria to apply, they need to attend a K-12 school here in the United States or in Canada, complete 3 total lessons in either Pathways or the EverFi financial literacy courses, and you can combine lessons in multiple ways, and then write and submit a 300 to 500 word essay. So there are all kinds of great ways that we can help students finance that college plan. All right. And SOPA, it's something everyone is thinking about. I'm glad Rachel is here because she is our EverFi expert on SOPA. She's the person you can contact if you have questions about it. But Rachel, do you want to talk a little bit about SOPA since we're on the slide here?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is definitely a common question we've been getting because of the SOPA legislations and rules around this. And I always like to start off the SOPA conversation by saying, you know, EverFi takes data privacy very seriously. So our goal this year is to make sure we get agreements on file with districts that have used EverFi in recent years. We have a lot of those agreements already on file. If you're not sure if your district has that agreement or not, you can actually go under option 2 when you get access to the slide deck and click where it says see participating districts here. And you can search for your district to see if that Exhibit E is on file. If you are not seeing your district, feel free to contact your IT person or get us in contact with them. I actually included my email address here. And as you can tell, we actually have 3 options for completing the SOPA agreement with your district for using EverFi. So all those options are linked here, but this is, again, a slide. You could even share this presentation with your IT person, but just know I'm going to be the best contact to get in touch if they do have questions too. So.
All right, and that brings us to getting started with EverFi. Many of you have already started with EverFi, which is fantastic. But there's actually 2 different ways that teachers can get started with EverFi. We have integrated with Clever. So if your district has synced with Clever, and we have a list of Illinois school districts here that have synced with Clever, it really makes using EverFi even easier than ever before. But these are the way, or this is the list of districts that have Clever synced. And if you're not Clever synced, no worries. We are actually going to do some breakout rooms. So those who are synced with Clever will go to one, and those who have not synced with Clever can come to the other and listen to me talk a little bit longer. And I think we're going to do the breakout rooms here.
I will also just jump in and plug being able to sync with Clever with EverFi. So it's something that it's very easy for school districts to be able to do and makes your life a little bit easier as a teacher or a classroom educator, because there's not another username or password for those students to use or to fill out. So if you do not see your district listed up here and you use or have used EverFi in the past, would definitely love to connect with you to get that kind of turned on and get that going. And again, you can reach out to any of us to make sure that that's happening. I'm going to leave this slide up for just a few more seconds for you to figure out if you're Clever integrated or not. And then those are in alphabetic order. And if you're part of Chicago Public Schools, networks 1 through 17 are the only ones that are Clever integrated within CPS. All right.